Welcome back to Dreaming Against the Machine. I am your host, Adam Becker, and some of you might know that I am a huge Star Trek fan. I have been my whole life. And maybe this is kind of silly, but I think it's a good sign for our world that Star Trek is such an enduring piece of culture with so many passionate fans. Because Star Trek, for all of its many faults, is fundamentally about making a better future. And that future isn't better because it's in space. It's better because it's a more equitable and loving future. Space is just the setting. It's the people that matter. From the very start, Star Trek was always an allegory for the world that we live in and a way to reflect on where we are and where we're going. That's why I love Star Trek and why it's such a big theme in my book, More Everything Forever, where there are, by the way, a few hidden Star Trek references that a careful reader might find in addition to the obvious mentions in the text. But Star Trek is also a large part of why I invited this week's guest, Chanda Prescod-Weinstein, to talk with me. Chanda is one of the few people I know who is indisputably an even bigger Star Trek fan than I am. She's also a scientist, an author, and a true delight. We had a lot of fun. Let's get to it. Welcome to Dreaming Against the Machine. This week, I'm delighted to have as my guest Chanda Prescod-Weinstein, a professor of physics at the University of New Hampshire. Chanda, thank you for being on Dreaming Against the Machine. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So, right before we hit record, Chanda uttered a scurrilous lie about me and said that I hate Star Trek.
I was told not to defame anyone, so I was testing the boundaries.
I see. Yes. No, that makes sense. Well, testing the boundaries might be part of what Dreaming Against the Machine is all about. So I wanted to talk with you. I want to talk with you about many things today, including your amazing new book, which just came out earlier this month.
Yes, April 7th, The Edge of Spacetime.
Excellent. But I do want to talk with you about Star Trek, because one of the things that you and I have in common is that we're both huge Star Trek fans, and we're both pretty angry about the way that people have misused Star Trek out in the world.
Absolutely. I was just telling some people yesterday that, when we talk about the distance between the Star Trek that we see on television versus the situation we find ourselves in right now, I think it's actually really great. And spoiler alert for people who haven't watched season 1 of Discovery, I'm sorry, but it's Mirrorverse Lorca who thinks Elon Musk is a hero. It's Mirrorverse Lorca. And there's a reason.
Oh my God.
That makes sense. A lot of people were really upset about that in the first half of season 1. And then season 2, it turns out he's from the Mirrorverse.
Oh,
and it's
shit.
like, oh, well.
Okay,
Yes.
So this is Star Trek Deep Cuts with your host, Adam Becker. No, it's okay. It's okay, because the worst part is I know exactly what you're talking about, and I was so angry when he said that.
But they redeemed it on the other end,
no, he's
right?
from the Mirrorverse. He's, he doesn't have the goatee, but he's evil Lorca. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, well, I think that's going to do a great job of setting the tone for the rest of the episode.
The real question is, do we live in the Mirrorverse? I think that's like the concern, right? Like, are we in the Star Trek 2020s, or are we actually full on Mirrorverse? I think that is something we could debate.
Now we're going to have a spoiler for season 1 of The Good Place. This is the bad place.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not much of a spoiler at this point.
Yes.
No, but oh God, is this the Mirrorverse or not? That is not a question that's occurred to me. I've just been, like in the canonical Star Trek timeline, we're overdue for something called the Eugenics Wars. And that does seem like that might be coming up.
Partly because it's primarily a television franchise, right? Everything has to be dramatic and kind of dressed up. And so I do think that sometimes people have this feeling like, oh, it's going to be this very violent, hands-on thing. And clearly there are elements of that happening right now with like the kidnappings by the ICE, Gestapo, pulling people off the street, regardless of citizenship, but definitely kind of color-dependent selection process happening there, right? But I do think that with the technology stuff, that it's maybe not necessarily going to off the bat have that feeling of it's very obvious and in your face that this is happening, but it's going to be quieter, kind of a creep. What I saw recently, people are calling securitization, which I think is also something that you kind of touch on in your book, that it just kind of becomes part of your life in a slow way. And suddenly you're in the midst of these kind of battles and don't even know that they've been happening behind your back, kind of.
The sort of slow boiling of the frog rather than all at once. Yeah.
Exactly.
Sorry, I'm still stuck on this question of whether we're in the Mirrorverse. Okay, so I should jump in for our listeners who have not seen Star Trek, of which I assume there are maybe a couple. First of all, go watch Star Trek.
Fix your life.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. The Mirrorverse is the evil version of the standard Star Trek universe where like the people who are nice are mean and vice versa. And it's, I think the origin of the trope that the evil twin has the goatee, because in the original Mirror Universe episode, evil Spock, who turned out to maybe not be such a bad guy, had a goatee.
I actually have that figure. I have an Exo 6 figure of Mirrorverse Spock. Goatee is very notable.
Okay, and we are finding out that actually maybe Chanda is a bigger Star Trek nerd than I am. I didn't realize that this was possible. I'm not used to being in this position.
You're the cool one.
Cool.
I'm the dork.
Yeah, again, not used to being in this position.
Yes. I mean, I am wearing a sweater with cat.
But what's not cool about cats? Cats are great. You know, the fearless leader of this podcast is my cat, Bobka. Yeah, no, there's nothing uncool about cats, not here. But okay, let's start at the beginning. Tell me how you got into Star Trek. How has it been part of your life? How did you become a Star Trek mega nerd?
I talk a little bit about this in the Edge of Spacetime, partly because, you know, when I actually hear the word space, I still hear that in William Shatner's Space, the Final Frontier, right? And I also hear it in Patrick Stewart's voice where he does Space, the Final Frontier, right? Like he does this very like...
You're making him sound Scottish.
But actually, my very first memory of going to a movie theater is seeing Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, when I was 4 years old. And for people who might have seen a few Star Trek movies, this is famously, quote, the one about the whales, right? So I write about this as kind of an early memory and association of understanding space as this place that we go to better understand ourselves and our home planet, because really Star Trek IV is about what happens if we don't learn to live well with each other and other species on the planet and take care of other species on the planet. So I got started early, and then I remember when The Next Generation premiered, that my dad was like, we should sit down and watch this show. And I had never my dad had never said, like, we need to watch this show together before. And so we sat down and watched it. And the character I identified the most with initially as a kid was Data.
Yes.
Which I think was like super science nerd, neurodivergent, mix of melange of things.
Oh, yeah.
But I really identified with his curiosity, and I was excited by his moral fortitude. I think that that's kind of an unsung feature of Data, but he was always thinking about what is right in every situation. I think we see different iterations of that, like manifestations in each of the characters, but Data has a very particular one that stood out to me. And so I think that that was when I was like, okay, Trek is for me. I started telling people that they should call me Brenda Spiner. This is like Brent Spiner plays Data on the show. The name did not stick, but I tried to convince my friends for a while. Yes.
Okay, Brenda.
And then, you know, in 2013, there was a Star Trek convention in Boston, and Sir Patrick Stewart was supposed to be there. And my spouse and I are both really big fans. And he in particular is a really big fan. And so I got us tickets as a birthday present. And then Patrick Stewart canceled. And then we went anyway. And I was like, these conventions are the greatest thing since sliced bread. And there was a Black woman who is one of the lead volunteers there, and I was telling her, I was like, there was so, like, this is so awesome. There are Black people here. Nichelle Nichols is here. This is amazing. And she was like, you need to come to the convention in Vegas. So we saved money and started going to the Las Vegas convention, and I go every August. So that's my
Wow.
kind of, my journey is that really for me, the fandom is what pulled me in, which you don't hear that often, that the fandom is actually what pulls you in. Especially for like a Black woman. Usually you're like, and the fandom makes me feel unwelcome, but the Star Trek fandom's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm a bigger fan than you are, Adam.
You are.
I'm like
You are. No, this is almost never happened
come to
me.
the convention.
I should
I'm a
come to the
proselytizer
convention.
for the convention.
No, oh God. No, I can see where this is going already. We're gonna take the show on the road. We're
It's
gonna record an
expensive.
episode of this from the convention.
Yes.
Oh no.
Yes.
I might have you beat on one thing, though. Maybe. I don't know. Have you been to Ticonderoga?
No, I don't even know what that is. You
Oh, I'm so excited to tell you about this. Oh my God. I have like the best news in the world for you because you actually live a lot closer to it than I do. In Ticonderoga, New York, there is a full-scale museum quality replica of the original Star Trek set.
I know about this. Yes, they have a convention. This is like the Trek Long Island. Is it on Long Island?
No, it's upstate New York. It's
I
like
read
way
about this
upstate.
there. Okay.
Yeah. By the time this episode of the podcast airs, I recorded an interview there. I was interviewed at that set for a docuseries with Kara Swisher, which is an extremely
awesome,
like one of the most surreal and bizarre experiences of my life. Yeah, I strongly recommend checking it out. Although I will say, like, I'm roughly your age. I think I'm slightly younger. You know, one of my first cinematic memories is going to see Star Trek VI, which came out when I was about 6. Yeah, no, if it had been the Next Generation set, I think I would have just lost my shit. I would have been crying too hard to be interviewed or something like that. But original series, you know, I love the original series, but it doesn't like hold the same place in my heart as the Next Generation does.
Something that I think about a lot with watching these sets and thinking about how they envision what the future will look like and the distance between that, because I was recently rewatching The Voyage Home for an essay I've been working on for Orion magazine about whales, actually. And I was just like looking at their understanding of what a screen would look like in the 24th century.
Yeah.
And I'm always wondering, for example, with new Trek, like Star Trek Discovery, even Starfleet Academy, which is set over 1,000 years into the future, right? What are they getting wrong? Like, what are the things? And I always worry about this because it's like, what if they don't have tablets anymore and they really do install things in their brains and it really is like a horror show of people being monitored inside their... Especially now, I just worry about... I'm a tech geek, but the tech scares me so much now.
I don't think that science fiction forms a template for what tech we should develop. The tech scares me too, but I guess I don't think about that as much in the context of Star Trek, just because I don't think of Star Trek as a show about technology. I think about it as a show about people. It's aspirational, but I think that it's, you know, it's about an aspiration for what a good future could look like, not in terms of the technology, but in terms of how we relate to each other. Right?
I totally agree. I think like even, you know, the many different humanoid species is clearly just about like the different ways of being human, right? In a not very subtle way.
No.
And especially in the original series.
And also in the Next Generation. I mean, like even Data is very clearly meant to be about like a reflection of ourselves, not about robots. One of my favorite episodes of any Star Trek series is that episode from the Next Generation. I think it's called The Measure of a Man. Yeah. Where Data, I don't want to say that Data is on trial. It's that Data's, humanity is on trial.
His humanity is on trial. Yeah.
They're trying to determine whether or not Data is a person or a piece of property. And Star Trek being Star Trek and not being particularly subtle, especially in those first 2 series, they have Patrick Stewart just sort of look right at the camera and say, oh, this is about slavery.
Right. I guess in terms of thinking about technology, I feel that the showrunners at different stages have all tried to grapple with technology in their own way and their own. So sometimes they're telling us about their own relationship, right? I think we see that especially in New Trek. And also, The Measure of a Man, I think, really blossomed when the Discovery writers took it up in season 2 of Discovery to do the storyline about the Kelpians and enslavement. And they have Doug Jones as Saru playing this character. He's like figuring out his relationship to his people who are still enslaved, the enslavers, and the question of how you make peace afterwards, which is kind of like Deep Space Nine and TNG all brought together. I actually think I freaked Doug Jones out at the convention last year because I was like, I've been watching that season very closely because I was working on a paper about Black mothers and daughters in Star Trek. And I realized that they had you as this white man actor do this really powerful storyline that's really, in some ways, about Black American history. And I just thought you did a really beautiful job. And I think Doug did not know how to process, like, if I say thank you, is it racist? Like... But I think the way that they could take things out of the context where we expect to see them, and instead of making the lead character, Michael Burnham, who's a Black woman, the vehicle for let's talk about race and enslavement, actually have someone who looks completely different play that role and tell that story is really powerful. So I think you're totally right. And it's interesting to see how they rehash old Trek into new Trek repeatedly.
Yeah. Star Trek has always been, like, from the first season of the first series, very interested in talking about race.
I think very interested. And I think there's kind of a love-hate relationship that critical race theory scholars have with Star Trek.
Oh, tell me
Because
about
on the
this.
one hand, there's like... So if you go into the scholarship and the literature, on the one hand, everybody recognizes the power of like the first interracial kiss on television. The fact that, Roddenberry's initial pilot for the show had a white woman, his wife, Majel Roddenberry, as the first officer.
Yep.
And NBC freaked out and said no.
Yep.
And Lucille Ball is actually the one who saved the show. She came in and was like, give him a second chance. And so he was like, fine, I will put someone that is received as a white actor in the second role, but now I'm going to put a Japanese American guy. I'm going to put this Black American woman. She's not there to be a sex object most of the time. She does have these very short dresses, but
yes.
And then they have this first interracial kiss between her and the captain. There's also, they add a Russian who's maybe a Soviet. We don't really know what happened in the second season.
Yep.
So there's that version of like the liberal multicultural framework. And then on the other hand, there is like this very intense reinforcement of the biology of race through having these different species that have these very essentialist characteristics, right? And that are intended, like the first iteration of the Klingons. The Klingons are clearly supposed to be the Russians. The Vulcans are clearly supposed to be some pan-Asian racist trope representation. Oh, yeah. And it's meant to be like a positive trope, but it is a trope nonetheless, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And Star Trek continues to struggle with that around species and whether people's culture is like somehow biologically hardwired.
Yep.
I think that's a place where Trek still struggles.
No, that sounds right to me. I mean, see, now I'm going to get into the deep cuts. There's an episode of The Next Generation where they were clearly trying to have their cake and eat it too on that one, where they, there's this big reveal that actually all of the species are all descended from a common ancestor.
Yes.
And it's sort of like what's uncomfortable about, or one of the things that's uncomfortable about something like Lord of the Rings, right? In that, like, yes, Tolkien, we know that he hated the Nazis, but he also talked about the race of men and the race of elves and the race of dwarves and also like certain kinds of, and also like just racism within the world itself, like certain kinds of men are just better because of their blood.
I mean, I saw an essay somewhere on Facebook a couple months ago that was talking about the problem of I guess, humanity of the orcs, which is
Yeah.
like, they're just like a species that you can just genocide because they're fundamentally bad. Is that kind of the setup?
Yeah, no, I think Tolkien apparently struggled with that in his
Yes.
own writing and letters. Yeah, but yeah, no, now as if Star Trek wasn't bad enough, now we're becoming Tolkien ultra nerds as well. This is great. This is going to be such an accessible episode.
I read Lord of the Rings so many times that my dad actually took the books away from me when I was like 13 or 14. He was like, you have to read something else. And I think what I moved on to was Charles Dickens, which I also obsessively read until I read an essay by George Orwell criticizing Dickens. So Orwell was like, Dickens's solution to every problem was benevolent rich people, and this is not a systematic solution. And I was like, well, fuck. And that ruined Dickens for me completely.
Well, George Orwell is really great for ruining various things with extremely good, trenchant points of view. There was a line that he had in an essay of his that I read just a couple of years ago that just ruined the idea of utopias. Right? He said like most imaginers of utopia are like someone who has a toothache who thinks that, happiness consists in not having a toothache. And they just want to have like this infinite extension of something that was only valuable because it was temporary. And so then, that gets us to all of these people who want to live forever. And as much as, bringing it back to Star Trek, there were all sorts of problems in season 1 of Picard, but I did like that Picard did not want to live forever.
I will say, I mean, within the fandom, right? Star Trek infamously, the first season is always terrible. And this is actually why, like, the new show, Starfleet Academy, really stands out because actually I think it had a very strong first season, like a fairly consistent. There are a couple of episodes where I was like, Whereas Picard, I feel like the first half of that season, I just kind of want to go into the writer's room and be like, hey, can we talk about this?
Yeah.
But then it kind of sings in the last 4 episodes. And I just feel like we needed more 7 of 9. Jerry Ryan is the best thing about the show Picard. Absolutely. We need a show where it's just about Captain 7. She's amazing. Jerry Ryan is like super amazing.
She was the best part of that show. I actually haven't seen Starfleet Academy yet because I canceled my Paramount Plus subscription because of all of the horrible connections that Paramount has to the Trump administration and fascism. And I'm very upset that Star Trek is like produced and hosted by this company that is like in deep with Trump.
Here's what I will say about that. So I can't fault anybody for like getting their TV, how they get their TV.
Sure.
I'm not going to tell people where they should go and get their TV.
Yeah.
Wink, wink.
Yes.
I will say my feeling about what Starfleet Academy did is I really do feel that they understood the assignment, that they saw what happened with Discovery, including I really feel like Paramount really meddled with Discovery by forcing Discovery to be a launch for Strange New Worlds. And Strange New Worlds was clearly there to satisfy the racist segment of the fandom that was upset that a Black woman was finally the lead of a show. And so they were like, no, we've got a white dude-led one coming. And we're actually going to use a significant chunk of her show to launch his show. I do think that there was an element of that, but I really feel like this writer's room for Starfleet Academy paid attention to that and also said to themselves, we may not get more than 1 or 2 seasons, right? Like, we're definitely getting 2, but we may not get anything beyond that. And they were like, we're going all in. We're going to be pro-Black. We're going to be queer. By the way, like when they first started advertising it, I was like, this show is going to be queer. And everyone was like, no, it's going to be like Dawson's Creek in space. And I was like, you don't know how to read a poster. And I just want to say I was right and y'all were wrong. so wrong, so queer, so Black. The aliens, even in the background, the elaborate Black hairstyles that they've been doing. And I really feel like they were just like, if we only get 2 seasons, we understand the assignment, which is to tell people, to tell trans people, to tell queer people, to tell Black people, stay with us, stay in the fight, stay alive. We want you here. And it is still possible for us to have this future, because the show is really about what happens when you have to rebuild after catastrophe. And I think we all need to be reminded that rebuilding after catastrophe is a possibility. Just because catastrophe has happened doesn't mean that's the end of the conversation. So kudos to them for doing that on Paramount's dime. I guess I will say that much.
I mean, I'm not boycotting the show. I just need to find a way to watch it that doesn't involve Paramount Plus. I wonder what that could be. Moving on. The idea of the show being about rebuilding after catastrophe just feels very, not just optimistic, but also very Star Trek, in that it's like, okay, let's look at what we're dealing with right now and find a way to talk about it that doesn't end in a pit of despair.
Like The Expanse.
Yeah, yeah, sure, yeah. Or like any of like the grim, dark, gritty reboot, science fiction that we've seen. I mean, some of which I really like. I believe that we need to have positive ideas about what the future could be and how we can relate to each other in that future. And so it's nice to hear that Star Trek is still committed to that.
One of the things that Star Trek as a franchise has done really well is both being optimistic and at the same time being willing to be critical.
Yeah.
Like, it's not about ignoring the problems.
Exactly.
It's simply about saying to us, we actually have to confront the problems. But if we decide we want to confront them, there is a possibility of succeeding on the other end. And I'm thinking about that juxtaposed with For All Mankind, right? Which is actually run by one of the same people who did Enterprise, the series. And so it is a Star Trek person.
Yep.
But I think in a lot of ways, it's much more nationalist in its attitude and a lot less critical of the capitalist space race or the capitalist approach to emerging into space.
That's so interesting, that comparison, because like that guy, Ron Moore, he did DS9. He did, and he also did one of those sort of gritty reboots. He did Battlestar Galactica.
That's right.
And I'm a fan of both of those shows, and I went and watched For All Mankind, and I really had that problem with it, actually. I thought season 1 was very interesting, like this sort of thought experiment of, okay, what if the Soviets had actually made it to the moon first? What happens if the space race just doesn't end there? That's fascinating. I've always been a sucker for that kind of alternate history. But it went to this place in the later seasons. I actually stopped watching because I felt like the wheels came off once it started being like, okay, and now we're going to have this company that's going to take us to Mars, and it's 1985. And I'm like, no, like, for so many reasons, no.
So I guess if you don't mind me saying a few spoilers about the last season of the show.
Okay, spoilers for the last season of For All Mankind alert.
All I will say about it is that there's a labor organizing storyline. So maybe that's all I need to say, is there's a labor organizing storyline.
That's good.
Which I thought was interesting. And I have to mention a television critic who I've learned a lot from is Nina Metz, who for a long time was the Chicago Tribune TV critic. And one of the things that I've really learned from her is to pay attention to what kinds of stories are getting told on film and on television and aren't. And one of the things that she's pointed out to me is how union storylines and labor organizing storylines just disappeared after the 80s.
Yeah.
Right. And so it was actually interesting to see them take this up in space as workers trying to organize on Mars. So that's the storyline that's happening in that season. So I won't say anything about the direction it went in, except to say that I guess I have all these stories of me saying things that I think might have freaked people out at the convention. I may have cornered Ron Moore for a second at the Star Trek convention a couple years ago and been like, that's not the end of the union storyline, right? Like, you're going to do more. We need more union storylines, not less. And he was like, well, maybe, you'll see. And I've seen the preview for the upcoming season, and it does seem like there is going to be more unrest. I put that in air quotes. But I do think that that's like an interesting thing that we should be thinking about right now, which is like there is this push to do these things in space, and there's no mainstream discourse about the labor issues that inevitably come up with this.
Unfortunately, we still live in capitalism, and that means we need to talk about our partners and sponsors. But fortunately, our partners and sponsors are great. And if you want to support Dreaming Against the Machine directly, you can join us on Patreon, where $5 a month gives you the chance to ask questions of upcoming guests and a dedicated stream of cat pictures. We love our patrons, and we also love being a part of the Multitude Collective at multitudeshows.com. Multitude is a podcast company made up of passionate people creating shows you can count on. Shows like American Medieval, a podcast about the Middle Ages, but with an American twist. Every week, Professor Matthew Gabriel is joined by an expert scholar to talk about either some bit of the medieval world itself or how Americans have, throughout our history, used the Middle Ages to say something about ourselves. If America has never been fully modern, it might be because we've always been a little bit medieval. Check out AmericanMedieval.com for more. New episodes are available every Wednesday. And here's a word from our sponsors. So this reminds me of one of the questions that I get a lot when I go out and give talks about my new book, More Everything Forever, which came out now almost exactly a year ago. It was April 2025. Right after it came out, people were really sort of in despair about the political situation here in the US. And so they're asking me, what can we do about these tech oligarchs that have taken power here in the US and are trying to take power elsewhere in the world as well? And it took me a while to think of, a good answer to that other than sort of the generic truth that there are more of us than there are of them, which is true. And I think part of the answer, but it's not the whole answer. And I still don't have the whole answer. That's part of why this podcast exists. But one of the answers that I eventually settled on giving to that question is, if you work for a big tech company, organize. If you have friends who work for the big tech companies, organize. Tell them to join the unionization efforts at their companies. Remind these tech oligarchs, hey, your power comes from the people who work for you, most of whom don't support Trump. Right after the election, there were all these think pieces about what happened to Silicon Valley? And I thought most of them were pretty bad because I think that, the ethos of the VC startup culture and the C-suites of Silicon Valley has always been sort of very techno-libertarian and verging on fascist and sometimes outright fascist. But it is true that the rank and file workers at most of the big tech companies have reliably and still reliably vote against Trump and the Republicans. And I think that makes this a ripe opportunity for labor organization.
It's interesting because I think there's a piece of this that's also about whether we actually have a shared reality. And I don't mean that in it's all a simulation. I mean that how we're processing what is happening and what values matter. And I think a lot of white collar workers, and I would count myself as a white collar worker because I'm a professor, solidly middle class, or in the case of some Silicon Valley workers, upper middle class, have this kind of fundamental belief that everybody's committed to democracy as an idea and that you should make all of your choices based on the assumption that everybody in the conversation is committed to democracy as an idea. And I think part of the transition that people need to go through at this point is understanding that you are dealing with a boss who does not believe in democracy as a fundamental principle for organizing society. Not just this company is not a cheerocracy, right? Like companies have never been run like democracies, except maybe workers' collectives. But I think what these workers need to understand is that this is now bigger than what happens internally at the company, that this is about whether people get a say in the organization and the running of their society, and that they actually have a lot of power over this because so much of the anti-democratic work is happening through and with tech. So when they think about organizing and what is their purpose in organizing, they have to understand that they are going up against a boss that does not believe in democracy. And they have to organize accordingly. Your strategy shifts if you understand that the person on the other side of the table fundamentally does not believe in your right to vote. That's it. You have to accept. They don't believe in your right to vote. That has to be where you organize from. And that's one of the reasons that you need to organize, is because we have to collectivize our power to say no. Actually, the right to vote is important, right?
Yeah.
It feels embarrassing to have to make that case, but
I think we got to get over that, though, right?
yeah.
If we're going to win this thing. What is it? I'm going to mangle this, but the line from that Yeats poem, right? You know, the best are filled with doubt and the worst are filled with a terrible certainty, or something like that, right? We gotta, I mean, like, I'm constantly doubting everything that I do, but we gotta actually feel good and right about what we're doing. Otherwise, we're never going to get anywhere.
I think this is actually one of the reasons that part of organizing, I always feel like an old like fuddy-duddy telling people this, but I grew up in a political organizing family. I grew up in the movement. And when I was growing up, people read together. Like they actually had study groups, they had reading groups. They weren't just going out and organizing protests. They were also reading about history together. And I think that there would be a lot of power right now in people going back and reading in detail about, for example, the Montgomery bus boycott, which actually basically up until the point when they won, it looked like they were about to fail. The movement was starting to fray. People were having a hard time. There were all of the internal disagreements about, like, can I afford to do this? This is a fiscal hardship on my family. It's a physical hardship, etc. Those fights all happened internally, and they were all having to organize through it. And I think about my grandmother who left Barbados on her birthday in the early 60s, before Barbados was independent. So she had never had the right to vote over anything that had happened to her, and came to the United States and had like a very miserable experience, came to the segregated country. She went to New York, so it wasn't the South, but there was all kinds of racism, as there continues to be. And there is a kind of optimism that was involved in people making those moves. And so I would really encourage people. They often think, oh, you just want me to feel guilty when I'm saying go back and read this history. But I want you to go back and read about how people held themselves together and fought anyway. Because they did have victories on the other end, and we need to have that energy. And so I think there's a lot that can be learned from the experiences of marginalized people of holding it together anyway. And that's one of the reasons people actually should go back and study the history of the civil rights movement, is not because I think people should walk around feeling guilty about being white or whatever, but because there are lessons to be learned about how you keep your shit together when you're terrified.
Oh my God, I have so much to say about this, and we don't have a lot of time left, but I'm gonna pick three things. The first is that I agree, and also this hits to me one of the things that I think is so infuriating about the tech oligarchs in particular, and like the culture of Silicon Valley, is they're aggressively uninterested in history. And I think that it is infuriating, but it's also sort of a weakness, right? You know, what happens to people who are ignorant of history?
Yes. I almost interrupted you to say, but that's a weakness. Every villain has a weakness.
Yes, exactly. And so, you know, their weakness is they can't read.
Right. And they really do think the Gen AI is saying smart shit to them.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. Exactly. So there's that. I also, man, to bring it back to Star Trek, I'm also thinking about you saying that, you know, in the movement when you were growing up, you would read, you know, people would read together, and the community building that happens when you read, I mean, when you read history together, but also when you read anything together.
Or books called The Edge of Spacetime.
Yes. Plug your shit. This is what we're here for. You know, just the importance of engaging with art together, just, you know, for the human experience of the art, but also as a community building experience. It's really important, and also strangely, or maybe not so strange, a running, very consistent theme in Star Trek.
Yes.
Right? They do this on every single one of these shows. They have the crew of the ship or station or whatever engaging with art together as a community, right? You know, they put on plays and concerts and, you know, little holodeck dramas together. And yes, you know, it's a storytelling device, but it's also, I think, really important piece of world building.
Starfleet Academy, by the way, does have an episode that
Yes.
convinced me to see a play that I otherwise wouldn't have considered going to see. No, I totally agree with you. And I also,
Yeah.
Bell Hooks, who's often known for her writing about Black feminist theory, the late Bell Hooks, wrote a book about visual culture. And the entire introduction is actually about the importance of Black people experiencing art as part of how we organize together and build community together. And this is actually very in line if you go back and read histories of environmentalism and Black relationships with environmentalism in the 19th century. One of the arguments that abolitionists made against enslavement was that it alienated Black people's relationship with nature. And so all of these things that we're told are frivolous, or that's great that you have free time, but like I'm about serious getting the work done. Some of that is about embracing our humanity, and embracing our humanity means having a relationship with the physical world, having a relationship with the night sky. This is something I wrote about quite a bit in my first book, The Disordered Cosmos. Not having access to a dark night sky is a civil rights issue.
Yes.
We can't treat that as frivolous because it's about how you connect with what did my ancestors do and what is the point of keeping this species going? Well, it's because I think another generation should see what I see. So I fight for a better sky and against these satellite constellations.
Okay, to invoke another sci-fi franchise here, they are literally trying to take the sky from us.
It sounds so paranoid, and I really feel like particularly the American astronomy community was very slow to respond to this. Even
Yeah.
actually, like the International Astronomical Union kind of got on it, but I feel like they took their time, and the American Astronomical Society, in my opinion, was like very slow to catch up on this. That this was not a small thing, but a really big thing from an ecological standpoint. And not just because why should a small number of people get to make decisions on behalf of every single living thing on the planet? What happens to the night sky and what happens to the moon in particular?
Yeah.
But also, a lot of species on this planet depend on certain rhythms of when there is light and when there is no light. And we've already messed with that a lot. I want to invite people to watch Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, because that is entirely an allegory about what happens when we just assume it's okay to destroy a species and how that may be the death knell for us on the other end.
Okay, that is a great place to end it, but I'm not going to end it there. We're going to do one more thing. There is something very upsetting and infuriating that we need to talk about, and we're going to see if we can find a way to find optimism in how wrong they are. That goddamn press conference with Hegseth and Musk, where they talked about making Star Trek real, made me. It made. Okay, I'm going to explain what it is, and then we're going to talk about how we feel about it, and we're going to take it from there.
I'm just going to breathe in deeply while you talk.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And then I'm going to try to do the same as I talk and somehow learn circular breathing. This is maybe about 6 weeks ago now, I think, and very much felt like something that was designed in a lab to piss me off and you off in particular. Pete Hegseth and Elon Musk had a press conference where Musk introduced Hegseth before Hegseth gave a really unhinged speech. It was, I believe, at the SpaceX headquarters down in Texas. And Musk was talking about how SpaceX was going to help make Star Trek real. And that Hegseth's work in the, redubbed Department of War was part of that mission. And Hegseth came on stage after Musk's introduction and flashed the Vulcan salute and said, "Make Star Trek real." And the whole thing was under a banner that said "The Arsenal of Freedom," which is the name of a Star Trek episode. And yeah, and it made, I got texts from roughly every single person I know who saw this thing saying, "Oh my God, Adam, you need to write about this." And I wrote back saying, "I value my sanity." You actually did write about it, thank goodness. But yeah, it made me want to scream, throw things. It's so awful. How do you feel about it?
I mean, I guess let me say in the season of Passover times,
Yes.
as two Jews talking about this, right? That I actually
Yes.
think it's important to contextualize the history of the Vulcan live long and prosper salute,
Yes.
which is that Leonard Nimoy is the one who introduced that salute. Leonard Nimoy, like William Shatner and Walter Koenig, also a bunch of the cast were Jewish children of Eastern European immigrants to the United States and Canada.
Yep.
Leonard Nimoy, as a child in Boston, had seen in an Orthodox synagogue someone make a symbol like that with their hands, and it was meant to communicate, may God be with you, may peace be with you. And so live long and prosper is like a very similar, it's like a secular version of that message. And so it is a Jewish symbol. And so I think it's very important, at least when thinking through my own reaction to it, and this was the part I didn't write about, is that Hegseth has been strongly identified with these white supremacist, anti-Semitic, Christian nationalist movements. And here he is taking up this, what to me is this Jewish thing.
Yeah.
And what Leonard Nimoy brought from Jewish culture and putting it into service of this jingoistic, anti-Semitic, white Christian nationalist story about what the future of the planet and space travel is going to be. And it is so typical, I guess, of like, you can't find your own culture, can you? That's all I will say about that. You can't even find your own culture. It's like very typical in a sense, but it's also so cynical, which is like, Star Trek was 100% about putting everybody on the bridge and saying, when we go to space, we will go to space as a unified species representing planet Earth, not a small number of assholes who have exploited the law and people and the planet and mine the shit out of everything so that the planet is literally turning into a dumpster fire, then going and exploiting it on behalf of this one flag. That's literally the opposite of Star Trek. It was infuriating.
I couldn't agree more. And also, like, one of the first things I thought of when I saw Hegseth doing the Vulcan hand salute was I thought, oh, okay, buddy, what about that other Vulcan phrase, infinite diversity and infinite combinations? How do you feel about that one?
Yes.
Because, that's what, to me, what a good future looks like, is a place where everyone can live together with infinite diversity and infinite combinations.
Look, those guys don't even believe in diversity of shoe size. Like, they're all wearing like the same wrong size floor shines. Like, I don't. Oh, God. They didn't, like, you can't even have different size feet, according to them. Why are they in charge of anything? Like, if that's not an expression of don't trust them with anything, they can't even wear correctly fitting shoes or tell the dude they work for that these shoes don't fit.
Oh, God. No, I'm right there with you. And so we gotta find a way to at least get to a world where people can have different shoe sizes.
Yes. Infinite foot diversity and infinite foot combinations. I
mean, okay, so like real talk here for a sec. I have like weird clown-shaped feet, like enormous weird feet, and actually Florsheim makes a lot of shoes in a lot of different like widths and sizes.
That's awesome.
And so like no shame, to them, but like Jesus fucking Christ. Yeah. But like the media literacy on display here is just shockingly low. And I mean, I've talked about this, you've talked about this. These guys just misunderstand science fiction over and over again. And the choice of Star Trek in particular is so telling to me, because it's like, okay, of all of the sci-fi franchises, you picked the one that is most stridently and openly and obviously opposed to everything that you stand for.
I do think it's easier for them to say Star Trek and not Star Wars, because the Star Wars thing just invites the Empire comparison, like right there, right? Like, you don't want to say that you're the rebels, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yep. No, especially because, George Lucas said that the rebels were inspired by the Viet Cong.
Right.
Well, I have so much more that I could say about that. I'm sure that you do too. We clearly need to talk more, both on and offline. Chanda, it has been such a pleasure having you on today, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you. The book is out, The Edge of Spacetime, Particles, Poetry, and the Cosmic Dream Boogie. It has a lot of Star Trek in it. And if you're not a Star Trek fan, that's okay. I explain everything. Thank you so much, Adam, for having me on. This has been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. This has been a joy, and I'm really looking forward to reading the book. Talk soon. Thank you again to this week's guest, Chanda Prescod-Weinstein. Coming up next week, Kim Stanley Robinson. To submit questions for future guests and to suggest other guests and to see more pictures of Babka, join the conversation on Patreon. You can also find us on YouTube, on Instagram at DATMpod, on the web and on Blue Sky at dreamingagainstthemachine.com, or just find us wherever you get your podcasts. Dreaming Against the Machine is a proud member of Multitude Productions. Our executive producer is Nick Carissimi. Our associate producer is Rosie Thomas. Our theme music is by Jared Emerson Johnson. Our show logo is by Nick James. And our fearless leader is Babka, the greatest cat in the observable universe. I'm Adam Becker, and I'll see you next week.